Bill O'Reilly continues his campaign against Black Lives Matters in this clip, but for the first time in a long time, not all of his guests are playing along.
Impact segment tonight. So far this year, 22 police officers have been killed by gunfire in America. Some believe that's in response to a number of black men being shot by the cops. In Bexar County, Texas, there's a video showing 41-year-old Gilbert Flores being shot to death by two police officers. The cops say Flores was armed, but no weapon is seen in the video. That doesn't mean anything, of course. And that kind of incident is seized upon by Black Lives Matter and other radical groups to demonize the police. Do you believe that the Black Lives Matter crew and other radicals are igniting violence against cops?
I think they're making the police job tougher, but I think the police can handle that. It's always been a tough job. But no, I don't think there's not a result of cops getting killed from Black Lives Matter.
Okay, so despite the provocative pigs in a blanket and all of this business, and every time there is a controversy about an officer shooting a black person, they're out there stirring the pot. You don't feel that disturbed individuals watch this and then act out?
There are fewer cops shot this year than last year. Are you willing to give Black Lives Matter credit for that? Cop shootings are down.
I know they're down slightly.
No, about 17%.
But in August, they were up.
It was a bad month.
Yeah,
but
it was
the
a
month
bad
before
month.
there were none.
Right.
I mean, overall, they're down.
Okay.
So I don't see an epidemic there.
You don't often see someone on his show both presenting information that's directly contrary to what he's saying and not having their mic be cut. So that was interesting.
He didn't have a chance to go, cut his mic.
Get him the fuck out. Shoot him.
I'm going to be the one who stops him. All right, so let's break that down. It was a little muffled at the end, so I want to make sure you understand. O'Reilly's like, yeah, but they're up in August. And he said, yeah, that's because there was 0 in July. There was no cops shot in July.
Yeah.
So when you say it's up in August, that means there was 1 as opposed to 0, right? At least 1. So, and the professor there was making a point, hey, overall, they're down 17% from last year. So if Black Lives Matter has got everybody riled up, why are there less cop shootings?
Yeah.
And well, there is no answer.
They might be at 0 if not for Black Lives Matters. Now, unfortunately, you have seen in the past week, obviously, there have been a couple of tragedies where cops have been murdered. That is the case. So that has actually shifted the numbers from what the criminal justice professor was talking about right there. We have the updated numbers. As of Monday, 24 officers have been shot and killed in the line of duty this year compared to 23 at the same point last year. Because again, in 1 week, we had 2, and when the number is as small as 24, that can really throw it off. O'Reilly did not mention that 500 people were shot dead by officers by July 10th this month. Now, that was months ago. I've seen recent numbers as high as 799. And so you can, of course, understand why O'Reilly would be much more concerned about 24 officers shot by criminals than almost 800 people, including many civilians, being shot by people who are not supposed to be killing people. Okay, we live in a crazy place.
So here's the thing. Since we're decent people, at least we like to think so, we care about both. We hate that 24 cops got shot and killed,
yeah.
right? We don't want anybody shot and killed. So, but we also hate even if you take the conservative number, 500 in half a year, basically. 500 people shot and killed by cops. Now, were they all unjustified? No. I'm sure in some cases, the guy pulled a gun and the cop had to shoot him to save his own life. That happened. Of course that happens, right? And so, but is it a shame that a human being died? Yes. And now some of them are obviously not justified. We cover that on the show all the time. And it's okay to say that's also a shame.
Yes.
But when you have the O'Reillys of the world and they say, 24 cops killed, that's a disaster, the worst thing that's ever happened, it's all the protesters' fault. What are they protesting about? 500 people got shot and killed by the cops. That I don't give a shit
Doesn't
about.
matter,
Doesn't matter. Don't care about those lives at all. And then he's confused why they call it Black Lives Matter.
Yeah.
So they're saying, hey, we already get that you think cops' lives matter. You care a lot about those lives. All we're doing is asking you to also care about the black lives that are lost. And yes, of the 500 or the 800 so far this year, isn't that a stunning number?
Yeah.
A disproportionate number of them are black and minorities. In fact, 2/3 of the people who are shot when they're unarmed, hence not a threat, are minorities. 2/3. That's why they say Black Lives Matter, because so far the media and the authorities have not acted in a way that has convinced us that they think Black Lives Matter.
2 things that stood out for me from O'Reilly in that clip is, one, it's that he thinks that What stirs the pot is activists talking about a problem, not the cops killing a person. That doesn't ever stir a pot. Doesn't matter what the conditions were. You can shoot somebody, that shouldn't bother anybody. It's protesters who matter, even though when the Tea Party's talking about something, that has never stirred any pot ever. Apparently they're potless in the Tea Party. And then before, when he said, okay, so there's a report that Gilbert Flores, the man that you saw that I did a final judgment on yesterday, could have been armed. I saw some headlines saying that he had a knife, but the articles did not actually contain any information about him having a knife. It might end up at some point that he did, but regardless of whether he somewhere had a knife at some point, you saw the video, he was not moving, his hands were in the air, and he was shot by the police. And something like 15 to 20 seconds later, 2 more cop cars pull up with backup. Those seem like relevant facts. But when Bill O'Reilly watches the video, he says, well, you don't see a weapon in the footage, but that doesn't mean anything. He had no emotional reaction whatsoever to watching a person who was not moving get gunned down. It didn't faze him in the slightest. Intellectually, emotionally, spiritually, it was nothing. He's a blank slate. That is who he is as a person. Remember that going forward when you watch his crap. In this next clip, you're going to see them. O'Reilly is going to unveil what he actually wants to get out of this interview. It is going to be abundantly clear.
In 2013, last stats available, 147 blacks were killed by cops, 268 whites. Okay? So to make this a war on black men is fallacious, is it not?
I think there's a problem sometimes with cops shooting too many people. I don't think it's not an issue of cops outgunning for black men. I think that is
All right, so you agree with that. It's not
but there's
cops
some
gunning
states,
black men.
like California, where police shoot people 6 times as often as New York. So they're doing something right in New York.
I agree.
We could reduce some police shootings.
I'm just trying to get, I want the police to be as competent as possible.
That's what we want, actually, and I don't think he meant competent there.
Yeah. And so, first of all, given the demographic breakdown in the country, the percentage of the population, those are still overwhelmingly bad numbers for African Americans, disproportionately shot. So,
but bear in mind, though, is that Republicans often think that there are way more black people in this country than there are. When polled, they think there's 2 to 3 times as many black people in America as there actually are.
because they're afraid of
Sign of
black
their
people.
fear.
Yeah, because then they're based on fear. So they think, oh my God, black people are everywhere. And remember, African Americans are only 13% of the country. Latinos only 13% of the country. So they're 25% of the country, but 2/3 of the people killed when they're unarmed.
Yeah.
So yes, it is wildly disproportionate.
Yeah, and it's pretty amazing that, I mean, he went on to say in the full video, well, you know, in Ferguson, he attacked the cop. Ha ha ha. They fully believe that, like, if you punch a cop in the face, well, then you've signed your death warrant. Of course, you should die. And I wonder if you did this sort of poll we talked about earlier in the show where you give people the 2 different conditions. White individual punches cop in the face, is the cop justified in now killing him? And you give him another one, this is a black person, punches him in the face. They fucking think that if you're a minority, you have signed your death warrant if you dare to strike an officer. I'm of the crazy belief, I don't want cops to be punched in the face, but I think that if you punch a cop in the face, he shouldn't immediately kill you.